Okay, I'd like to welcome our listeners to this first broadcasting by the Quaker Centre in Christchurch for PlainsFM. And in these broadcasts, we're going to start off with a brief introductory broadcast, and then we're going to look at the Quaker testimonies, which are basically statements of our values. So to start off with, I'd like to talk about our individual relationship with Quakerism. And I have with me Di Magden, Zeri Gordon, and Arthur Wells. So, Di, could you tell us, please, what it is about Quakers that attracts you?
What attracted me in the first place was doing religious studies at the university, Christianity Stage 3, and we were looking at the important gals in early Christianity, and they were an inspiring lot. And I read a book about a woman called Lucretia Mott, who was a Quaker, an American Quaker, and she was a very strong anti-slavery woman, did a huge amount of work against the slavery in the US. And then she moved from there to peace, and then she moved from peace to something else that was equally important. I was really inspired by her, and I said to my husband-to-be, great gal, this Lucretia Mott. He said, well, I went to her school in New York when I was a boy, and that was an early Quaker school. And he said, if you're interested in that, we could go to the Quaker meeting here. They have a meeting every Sunday. They don't call it a church service, where people sit around the room, either in a circle or in a square, but anyway, it's around a centre, and sit in silence, and unless they're inspired to actually say something that comes to them to be said. And I thought, considering I was always interested in religion, but turned away from traditional faith and the kind of thou shalt addition to it, or imperative in that. So I loved the fact that we could sit in silence and listen carefully, stretching our ears, as one of our old members used to say, stretch your ears and listen carefully to what people have to say.
So you've been a Quaker for quite a long time, Di.
Yeah.
And when you initially joined, was that in Christchurch or
It was
overseas?
here.
Okay.
It was here.
It was here.
Yeah.
Right.
It was here. And I was always amazed at how there was some kind of connection. If you listened really carefully, then the next person who spoke, if indeed there was another person who spoke, they stood up to speak. And then there was an uncanny connectedness between what the first person said and the second person said, even though on the surface of it was no connection at all. So I used to always go out of those meetings feeling inspired by what quiet listening did, how it was great to get away from a service or a faith based on theology and dogma. There was nothing there except us in the silence. It's very inspiring.
Sort of DIY number 8 religion, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. There was that.
I think that continuity of ministry when people speak arises out of a deep commitment by Quakers to listen carefully and prayerfully to what someone is saying. And when everyone really does that, then if they're moved to contribute further, it's almost certainly going to be linked in the way that you discovered. I think that does happen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Derry. And for you, what was it that attracted you to Quakers?
Well, my mother was a Quaker, and so I knew about it from an early stage, but we always lived far too far away from any meeting, so it was rather peripheral in my life. As a family, we attended the local Presbyterian church, and that was my main form of worship and service through to early adulthood, really, or maybe not even early. But when I went overseas, there was much more opportunity to start taking part in Quaker services, And by then I had become increasingly uneasy about the constraints of the normal Protestant religions as to what you needed to believe and what the Bible told us and that sort of thing. And so increasingly I found myself much more at home in the Quaker services, where the underlying principle is you must know what you believe and you must own that. And if you don't own it, you don't believe it, and move on, keep seeking. So that really became more and more important to me.
Arthur, how about you?
Oh, like Derry, I had a Presbyterian background. My dad was a missionary and then a minister. But as a young man, I really lost my faith. And looking back, the way that happened was reading the history of the church more than anything else. There were just the appalling wars of religion and conflicts made me think, this can't be true. And then I read science and evolution and became a bit of a disciple of Bertrand Russell. But I had a yearning to somehow revive contact with the life of not just the mind, but some other thing. I don't like calling it the spirit because I'm not really comfortable with that word, but my dad had been in the war as a nurse orderly, and he had carried stretchers on the battlefront with Quakers, and he told me that he had really admired some of those people for their character, and that stuck with me. And then about 30 years ago I met a couple of Quakers here in Christchurch who were very much involved in the peace movement. That was Kate Dews and Peter Lowe. And I liked those people very much, and they said, well, come along and see what you think of the way we do things. And I was completely at home here instantly and wanted to stay. So, yeah.
Arthur, the thing that interests me about you is that you're a profound member of this meeting, but at the same time you're a Zen master. And I guess what I found lovely about this meeting, or about any meeting, Quaker meeting, is that pretty well anything goes so long as you say, Derry, you own it. You own it, what you are. You're not there to proselytise, you're there to be profoundly who you are and find out who you are. So how did you marry your Zen Buddhism with that?
Well, I recognised very quickly that this is a group of people where you're invited to think for yourself. And I found that there were skeptics like me, there were Buddhists, and we now have a lovely Muslim woman sits with us because she likes the open kind of practice that we have that includes people just on the basis of their sincere seeking, I suppose you'd say, really. But the Christian background was necessary for me because of the way I grew up, to somehow return to it and examine it closely. But it exists in a kind of creative tension with learning Eastern religion, Buddhism, Hinduism that I've practiced, meditation practices. That's a useful tension for me. It makes me think, where is the common ground? Is there any genuine common ground here?
And do you find that there is?
Oh, very much so, but not in any sense that you could say was to do with theology or a creed or a doctrine. And that's, for me, why the Quaker absence of creeds and doctrines, insistence on personal experience, makes complete sense.
So I imagine that listeners might be wondering that in the absence of this creed or doctrine, what is it that holds people together in the Quaker tradition?
Well, we do have, over the years, and particularly from the early Quakers, we have assembled a series of things called testimonies, where there have been statements made, and again, no one is required to sign to them, but they are there as markers and guides, guides rather than markers, as guides to where we are, so and how what we have in common.
Yeah.
But it's quite important to note that even those are not a requirement.
Right.
For example, the testimony of peace seems to me very much related to the way we sit in silence. My experience is that when we sit in silence, feelings of enmity and hatred dissolve. You know, this is a very powerful tool for creating peace in the world, is learning to be still.
Be still.
Yeah.
And when someone does speak, to know how to listen to them.
Exactly.
There's very poor listening, we might say, in the world in general.
Yeah.
It's great to be able to have that your attention drawn to that over and over again. If you're going to be in a meeting and someone speaks, you have to listen very carefully.
So if I'm a newcomer to a Quaker meeting, what can I expect to happen?
You probably sit there wondering when something's going to happen.
I'd imagine that the sitting in silence and then people getting up and speaking is a license for people to get onto their hobby horses and talk about all sorts of stuff. How do you regulate that?
It's a very difficult one. I have, I think, only twice in my time in the meeting, sort of 40, 50 years now, actually had to do something like that. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
But I think what's more surprising is it doesn't often happen.
Right.
We do have people that come and they find, I think particularly born-again Christians, they find, oh, here's a congregation ready to be dealt to, you know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take many times before I think they begin to realise that it isn't what's going on.
Exactly.
And so they either calm down and join us or they give up on us. So it's mostly sort of, it doesn't happen very long with any individual. But yes, it does happen occasionally.
What about prayers and hymns and readings and things like that? Do you have these?
Yes. My mother was a Quaker from birth. At meetings, she was of a mind to give a little Bible reading, a short one.
Oh, yeah.
And I know other people sometimes have readings that they wish to give, especially some of the Quaker stuff. But it's not really that common.
Yeah, I can remember sometimes, not very often, but times when Di has got up and sung to us. And that's what we call ministry, you know. It's
right.
Anything that anybody does is ministry. We have that joke, don't we, that we didn't abolish the priesthood. We abolished the laity.
That's right.
So everyone has a responsibility for this thing we call ministry to support the meeting with some kind of thing that wells up and seems to need to happen.
So ministry is the contribution that people make during in the silence or out of the silence. Is that right?
From the silence, yes.
Right.
Yes. The way I've tried to describe it is that the meeting is bathed in silence, and from that some things will come up, and it's usually spoken ministry. But Arthur's right, and Diane's not the only proponent that's given us a song, and sometimes a poem.
Yeah.
And I remember one old Quaker who's since passed away could quote at length from the Bible. And someone tackled him and he said, oh, it's a party trick. But he did know it, and it was apposite to what was going on at the time.
You'd get a whole psalm from him, wouldn't you?
Yes. And I love that, just because, as you say, it was directly connected to what was being reflected upon, or what in the gathering. What I do miss sometimes is the singing, because I love singing. But I have to say, I've thought about the singing that I love to do in church services, and I love singing them in funerals, because that gives me a good opportunity to sing. But I don't always, in fact, I've mostly never taken any notice of the words. Because if I took notice of the words, I would just faint and fade away, because some of them, they don't reflect me or the world the way I see the world at all. It's just that joyfulness of singing. So I've experienced Quakers getting together after a meeting and having a gather around the piano and a good old sing-along with somebody who can really play the piano and really get us singing. Really. And many Quakers belong to choirs. I do myself, just to get you have to get your singing somewhere else.
Arthur, you with your Buddhist background, could you tell me is there any difference between sitting and meeting quietly and meditation?
I think that they're very much the same thing. In Buddhism, there are systematic ways of attending to the breath and the posture in order to steady the mind and calm the mind. But I look around and see most Quakers have discovered that for themselves, or talked to one another and figured it out. There's nothing deeply mysterious about learning to do that, but it does feel different to do it in a group of people in a way that you just don't know what's going to arise out of that. There's sometimes a sense of what we've called a gathered meeting, and it's a very strange, almost telepathic kind of sense that we're more deeply connected than we were, even in the first half hour, say. And something surprising can come out of that at times. People often say, you stood up and said exactly what I was thinking. And that's a common experience in our meeting.
Yeah. So how did this slightly oddball way of relating to spirituality or whatever arise?
Well, it started with a man called George Fox. And Fox was, I suspect, a fairly cantankerous individual, but certainly he was the one who, being dissatisfied with the religion of his time, in a time when there was a lot of religious ferment, so that clearly the ideas of it doesn't have to be the way it always has been was very much in vogue. But he, in fact, developed this form of worship, which is, to follow on from what Arthur said, it's a form of deep meditation in a way, but there is, for something, a spiritual aspect, although you don't like the word, that combines it together. But Fox was the one who started this. And at that time in England, of the time of religious ferment, there was quite quickly a large number of people cottoned on to what he was actually doing and found they could follow.
And what he did away with were having any kind of paid priesthood or ministers.
That's right. Yeah.
And also sacraments. And that might look like a kind of a negative thing to do. Toss it out. But it wasn't just for the sake of throwing things out. It was because everything's sacred.
Yes.
Why have a sacred meal, a communion service, when every meal is an opportunity to experience that?
Yes, that's right.
Why have a special place when every place is special? When every encounter with another person is special?
And why have a special priesthood when, Fox found that he could have his interpretation of the Bible, and he was very much a Christian. His interpretation of that Christian history was, to his mind, at least as valid as that was given by the professional priesthood.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of arguments with the church. In fact, he got thrown out, he got stoned, all kinds of things. The arguments were quite physical at times. But
he got put in prison 8 times, I think, for a total of about 9 years.
Yes.
Or something. And every time he got put in prison, it could have been a death sentence that he was facing.
Quite.
Yeah.
So that explains, to a certain extent, why Quakers have got a history of work with people who are in prison and supporting.
It is, yes.
Supporting basically alternative ways of thinking too.
Yes. Yeah, and it was his line. I think I said it before. No, I didn't say it. His line on the business of independence was, he said, the Bible says this, and the preacher says that, but what can you say? And it's going back to this idea that you've got to see it for yourself, and you've got to own it.
You have to have your own connection with whatever you regard spiritual, whatever.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Whatever truth you uphold.
Mm.
Whatever truth you believe in, you uphold it.
Right.
Yeah.
Uphold means...
You act on it. You act on it.
You live it. Yeah.
Yeah, you live it. Yeah.
So is that the basis where these testimonies come from then?
Yes, I believe so.
think so.
Yes, it's an attempt to corporately record where people have come to.
Right.
Yeah.
But, the fundamental thing we've just spoken about is actually more important than the testimonies.
Yes, I think it is. And one of the things that comes out of it is that it's a cumulative tradition. Every person who comes along here to this meeting adds something to the whole of what Quakerism is. It's not like it's all been delivered once and for all by George Fox or anybody else.
That's right.
It's a growing, organic sort of thing, and we're all part of it.
At that point, I think that we need to leave this discussion. Thank you very much, Di, Derry and Arthur, for sharing your passion and understanding about Quakerism. Our next program, Quaker Focus, will be on October the 25th at 9 p.m, when we will be talking about the Quakers and the testimony of simplicity. If you'd like to find out more about Quakers, you are welcome to join us for meeting on Sundays at the Quaker Centre, 217 Ferry Road, or check out our Quake City Quakers Facebook page. See you next time.